Okay, so we're going to study this speech of Moses with the questions in mind. Why would Moses record this speech? I mean, really, why would you share that your deepest hope was shared with God and God shut you down? Why would he share it? So you'll be thinking about that. I'm going to give you a bunch of possibilities, and I'm not only interested in the why would he share it and in bringing you a point of view I'd never thought of before. I'm interested in how each explanation speaks to your heart. So what's the message you need to take home from this learning and this teaching? And I will try to share with you my thoughts on that too. If you want to be looking in the text, I mentioned before we did our Torah readings that the language matters. The language matters. It's on page 1005. But if I were to summarize, it's at the top there. I beseeched God, va'et chanan. I pleaded, I asked for grace at that time, saying, let me, I pray, cross over and see the good land. Evrah na ve'ar'eh et haaretz hatova. On the other side of the Jordan, Ever hayarden, Ever. And he tells his people of this passionate prayer and God's trenchant repudiation, enough, never speak to me of this alone. Vayit aber Adonai, God was angry. Added in here in verse 26, ki lema'ancha, because of you, velo shama elai, and he did not listen to me. And he said to me, rav lach, enough. It's too much of you, and as I mentioned, that is a echo to the Korach story. Al tosif daber elai. Stop talking to me. By the way, he could have just given the highlights. You know, I asked God to cross over, and God said no. You know, but he adds in enough, don't speak to me anymore. Why all of the details? What is it teaching? So I'm going to give you three paradigms. By the way, does everybody have a study sheet? You do, good. The reason I give study sheets is I actually hope you might take it home and share the messages. Continue to think about what the lessons are for you. Lesson one is to teach the power of vulnerability and that not all hopes are realized. Rabbi Jan Urbach writes, this is a model of religious leadership that does not deny personal vulnerability, but leads through it. We're taught a little bit to be vulnerable, but we're also taught, don't share too much. And I would imagine many of you who've studied leadership in a lot of different capacities, think about that role of vulnerability. Should I be? If people see me as vulnerable, will I be perceived as weak or indecisive? And Rabbi Urbach says this is specifically to teach us, because had it been omitted, we would have been left with the impression of Moses as a stoic who simply accepts without protest or pain God's decree when he says, don't enter the land in numbers. Or, a selfless public servant, who hears the reaffirmation of the same decree a little bit later and is concerned only with the future of the people without thought of his loss of his own hopes and dreams. Moses himself corrects the record, revealing that he deeply yearns to cross over into the land, and that he pleaded with God in heartfelt prayer to change God's minds, only to be met with a disappointing, perhaps crushing no. There's a power in vulnerability. There's a power in sharing disappointment. There's a power in sharing that your hopes may have been dashed, because when you lead out of vulnerability, we give others permission to be vulnerable. I think it's a very hard thing to do. I think people don't feel safe being vulnerable. They're afraid how it will be judged, how it will be misused, how it will be taken. So number one, this is a lesson in vulnerability. Number two, this is a lesson about prayer. This is a lesson about prayer. Here's what Ibn Ezra says in his commentary. Moses is trying to instill in them a love for the land of Israel. I teach all of the time that prayer is about connecting to sacred values and aspirations and saying, how does it touch me? It's not meant to be an expression of catechism. I need to say these words in order to fulfill prayer. It's meant to make us think about how we are living the value. And for me, I can't think of anything more important right now at a time when so many are distancing themselves from Israel due to disconnect with how we perceive the Israeli government and actions. And sadly for me, that gets disconnect from policies and actions from Israel. And to say these prayers remind us of the centrality of Israel in our life, that for me is a message that needs to be iterated and reiterated. The Mei Shiloach builds a little bit about this vulnerability. I pleaded with God, why did he tell these words? Even though on the surface it seems as if prayer had no benefit whatsoever. So the whole question of, is prayer meant to impact God? He caused them to understand that this prayer is not in vain. Even though God had promised that I would not enter the land, still it did not prevent me from praying. Even though it may seem that there's no salvation from the source, one may not withhold himself from God's mercies. He prays so that Israel could learn to not withhold themselves from praying. And a part of my vulnerability is praying and sharing where I feel like I need to grow spiritually and as a Jew. I teach well that prayer is about sharing our vulnerabilities and what's in our heart. I don't know that I always get there in my own personal practice the way I'd like to. Can I use prayer as an opportunity to share, this is what's in my heart now, this is my pain, this is what's going on now? And I think sometimes I step back from that a little bit, as if confronting it might lift it up in a different kind of way. Might prayer, as opposed to the words that are expressed, be that which gives us an opportunity to express what's deep in our hearts, even if it's our disappointments. And I want to live that more. So for each one of these, speak to me. Rabbi Auerbach again, prayer responds to primal emotion. No response can be given. Moses knows and understands intellectually, theologically, he's owed nothing. But emotionally, it's unacceptable. He feels wronged. His heart cries out in prayer. Thus maybe the word et chanan from the root chen, God be gracious to me, even though I may not deserve it. Prayer is a path towards expressing the inexpressible. The modality through which inner conflicts, the unresolvable, can nevertheless be voiced and thereby better tolerated and managed. His prayer is not answered in the usual sense. He doesn't get what he wants, but the process of praying enables him to move forward, to affirm faith and continue to speak in God's name. That's the rest of Deuteronomy. What an important way to think about prayer. Okay, turn the page. And dare I say, prepare to have your mind blowing. Aviva Zornberg wrote a book called Moses. It's a few years ago, and it just turns things in such interesting ways. She asks this question, why would he want to share this? Why would he share? God does not listen to me. It's confounding vulnerability played out in front of the people. In the last months of his life, Moses expresses himself in a new and personal way. So she said he's realized as a leader, he needs to interact with them differently. To the people who in the past he's commanded, he's reproached, he's exhorted, but never been intimate with. What is the new timbre of voice, and why does it make itself heard now? She says this is a story of him hoping that the people would intercede with God on his behalf. I prayed to God for grace. And what he's really saying is, you guys pray for me. When he says, I was punished on your behalf, he's saying to them, your job was to have stuck up for me. So that line that I used to read as, oh my God, he's still blaming them at the end of this life. What's that about? No, he's inviting them to pray for him. And they don't get it. She reads between the lines. By the way, how disappointing when we want someone to stand up for us and they don't. How painful when we hope someone will take up our cause and it falls on deaf ears. You put it out there in a subtle way and the person doesn't get it. That's what Zornberg argues is happening. He's implicitly asking, where are your prayers when my prayers were failing? He solicits the people, plead for God. And it's an unprecedented note of candor. He reproaches them for abandoning him at this hour of need. This is him talking to them. And then she reads God's response in a way that I've never seen before. When God explicitly stops Moses mid-sentence, enough, Rav lachem, hey, it's too much what you're doing. You're reminding me of Korach. It's as though God were redirecting him to another horizon. God's relationship with Moses, unique and intimate as it may be, is only for the sake of Israel. This is the story of God blocking Moses' access to the divine that had been so real and reframing the situation as a human one. It's not God's decree, but the fraught relationship between Moses and the people. If God told him so curtly, never speak to me of this matter again, implicitly God saying, never speak to me, redirecting him from God back to the people. Why? Look at what Zornberg says. Here's the paradox of Moses' life with words. The guy who says, I am not a man of words, who becomes a man of words, especially now. While his intercession with God on behalf of Israel is eloquent and effective. You know, up on the mountain as there's having the golden calf, when he's asking God to lead them, he is effective. But his interactions with the people are often curt, angry, and adversarial. By the way, I had never thought about that until I read this. Because I'd always thought of him as the man who was arguing on behalf of the people, but really so many of his interactions were angry and adversarial. And God is catching that. It's precisely after God has dashed his hopes of crossing over that Moses achieves a new force of language. Instead of a passion to cross over, Moses is now possessed with a new passion to reach across to the people before he dies. He lays his intimate narrative at their door. Where he previously had addressed them in God's name, conveying God's messages and commandments, he now addresses them Bishvil Yisrael, for the sake of Israel, on behalf of Israel. His role as God's spokesman shifts to a new register. Now he speaks without divine authority to bring something new into being. So God saying, stop talking to me, is saying, talk to them. By the way, think how often this happens in our own lives. Through these final speeches, all the rest of the book of Deuteronomy, and it's a long verse. You've got 30 more chapters. There's a powerful current and connection. He tells the people of thwarted prayer, let me cross over, and speaks repeatedly with the fact that he's not doing it while his audience is. I need to talk to you guys who are crossing over because I'm not. I have a different job and a different chore. Why does he choose to descend from his pedestal of privilege, knowing perhaps in order to cross over to the people before he dies? He's now the storyteller whose authority lies in his approaching death. As the storyteller, he reaches across the gap between teacher and student, analyst and patient. His real life is concentrated in the unforgettable force of his final narratives. And then Moses invites his people to a new kind of listening, seeing, and knowing. And so I'm reading this story because of Aviva Zornberg differently than I ever have before. The purpose of this speech is to let him know that he had gotten so caught up in his own self. God said, stop it. Your job is to be connected to these people. And it was just what he needed to jolt them from his personal pain to his sacred task. And I'm left with my own kavanah. Do I sometimes get so caught up in my personal pain and vulnerability that I forget my sacred task? Is there a way to say my sacred task is to teach these people what they need for what is coming next? So I have to tell you, I'm so moved by this in a deep, deep way, but I want to know your thoughts, your reaction. Why this prayer? Why do we need the details of his, what seems to be a colossal failure? I asked God, and God said, enough, stop talking to me. How do you read this now? And then Bruce and then Leslie.
So, the Israelites would ask, why you can't come? And saying, God told me I can't come. That's not good enough for a Jewish mind. You have to say, I took the appeal. And I went back and I asked again, and I got shut down royally. And in that way, it's been clear what Zornberg says, which is that Moses is just a conduit. He's just the way that God gets these people to move from slavery to freedom.
Conduit to move them from slavery to freedom. By the way, I love how you read this. Why did he share that he did this? Because you all needed me, and I know you all needed me, and I needed to share with you. I tried, and the answer was no.
So a little similar to Aviva Zornberg, but different. I'm going to turn this story on its head. I think Ve'echanan and Vayit Aver are Hitpael, correct? So it's a very interesting stem. It's reflexive. So Moses, he didn't plead. Moses found grace within himself. Moses forgave himself for losing his temper, for being a human being, for some of the mistakes he may have made. And Vayit Aver, with this crossing over, God is tied in knots because of what needs to happen. And Moses isn't going into the land because of the people caused him to sin. It's on account of the people, on account that the people need a new leader. His time is up. I'm not going because you need better than I can do. And God is tied up in knots because this is the Haftorah, the Parshot of consolation. God doesn't want to go there anymore. God is despondent, tied in knots of losing his most faithful prophet and disappointing Moses.
That was so beautiful. Va'et Hanan, I gave grace to myself. Vayit Aber, crossed over, tied up in knots, because lema'anchem, because of for you, there needed to be a new leader. And that is hard. Prayer is learning to forgive ourselves and moving to a different point that we need to move.
Just briefly, since, moving into a new period and change is sometimes very messy. And since they're moving to the next phase, it needs new leadership, new challenges, and it's a case of moving from old to young.
Nice. Yes, moving from old to young. Camille.
So I'm just sort of thinking back when, Moses was like, hey, like, why me? What's this? And he's like, I'm thick of tongue. I can't do this. And I feel this in this moment, God is saying, okay, this is done. Now you have to go back and face your own fears and go back and talk with your own voice. And then he does.
So stop talking to me because you have it in you to say what you need to say. By the way, we get very dependent on, this is the way I've always done it. I've always spoken God's voice. He needed to find his own voice. The stop talking to me is such a telling detail. Good. We're doing good stuff with this, Rana.
So just to kind of pick up on Leslie's point and kind of follow through, I think maybe when God is saying, stop talking to me, it's like God is afraid that God is going to change God's mind. If you don't stop talking to me, I might go back on this because I can't take it. But I know what's right in terms of the change of leadership. And the other thing in terms of why Moses might have relayed this very painful episode is perhaps to say, this is going to happen to all of you at one point or another, as it happens to, I think, all of us, that you pray for something so fervently from God and it is denied. And the message is, don't let that distance you from the whole picture. Like, don't walk away from all of this because your personal prayers are not always going to be answered.
Right, and isn't that, as a religious person, one of the most important pieces of faith? People say to me often, my prayer wasn't answered, why pray? And this says, you know what? Not every prayer will be answered. I think that if we can give people a gift, the gift of knowing that there will be disappointments and suffering in life, and that part of what we need to do is figure out how we respond to those disappointments and suffering, this becomes really one of the most important episodes and scenes in the whole Torah. What a powerful, powerful lesson. Joe.
This is a very special moment because of his particular, but we see this all the time playing out in life as we know it. When people are convicted of something and they plead for mercy and they want to see if the community will come and support them, and if they don't, as witnesses or as helpers, it makes it more complicated. And so people who are leaders who rely on people that come to their aid and they don't, it's very human. And we see that in this story as well, but it can happen almost in any situation where there's a leadership, there's going to be a change because the people aren't supporting that particular leader.
The moment of leadership when you feel that your community is not with you is one of the most lonely moments you could ever experience. And how you respond to that moment is that defines who you are. It defines who you are. And on a certain level, Moses moves beyond that disappointment, which for me is a very powerful thing. Well, Yeshar Kochachem, I keep sitting with this, keep asking how it speaks to you, because I imagine that it should. One of the things that strikes me about today's one of those days that's easy to kind of be a little silly about. Today is Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av. And the reason I say it's a little silly is because it's often portrayed as a Jewish Valentine's Day. Here's what it says in the Mishnah. On this day, the young woman would borrow white garments, on this day actually and Yom Kippur, and they would go out to the fields and they would dance. And they would say to the men, consider your choice. Consider your choice. By the way, how sweet. Many, many messages of we need to help people meet each other. Everyone is equal, so they borrow dresses so that everyone would have them. The sense of dancing, finding joy, finding connection. There's a lot in there. But what's interesting is in the Gemara, so what I quoted to you was the Mishnah. In the Gemara, it said this was the day when the tribes realized they could marry one another. It's the day when we shifted from tribalism and division to connecting and reconnecting. And for me, Zornberg says this is a story of Moses connecting to the people in a way he couldn't have ever imagined before. It's a story when it says, according to the Gemara, that the tribe of Benjamin was allowed back into our people. And for that, you need to know a terrible scene from the book of Judges, where the Benjaminites did such terrible things that resulted in civil war and discord, and we turned back to each other. It says it was the day when the road to Jerusalem, which was closed by the king of Israel, Jeroboam, because, we're breaking off, you're not going to go give your offerings up there anymore. It says when that road was reopened and people could go make offerings, we are living at a point in history where our disconnect and our anger and our separation is so real. It's so defining. And so to have a story that reminds us of the power of connecting, the power of who we are meant to be as a community and a people, for me is a really, really important lesson. So Yeshar Kochachem, we will continue with our Musaf service. Neil will lead. Page
184.
Good. Page 185. Thank you. And I will go next door and teach this.